name is Doug Kreiner, and I'm the Faculty Director of the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's town hall for candidates seeking the Democratic nomination to represent the 125th District in the State Assembly. All candidates were invited to participate, and we are just thrilled that all 7 candidates have been able to join us here this evening. We particularly appreciate your heroics doing a back-to-back conversation and making the time to speak with all of us here this evening. Thanks so much again for your participation. Cornell University does not endorse any candidates, but we are pleased to be able to host the forum for the benefit of the general public. Our format for this evening, very briefly, will be as follows. We'll begin with opening statements from all of the candidates. Then we will have about 4 questions from our first moderator this evening, David Bateman, Assistant Professor of Government at Cornell. These questions will be drawn from those that were submitted by attendees in advance when they registered. We also invite you to submit additional questions for the candidates now. At any point during the first half of our program, you can submit questions using the questions and answers feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Shortly before 8 p.m., we'll have a several-minute intermission. In the second half of the forum, Sabrina Karim, Assistant Professor of Government, will moderate and ask questions, including those submitted by the audience during the event. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our Institute Director, Representative Steve Israel, to give you a very brief overview of the Institute, some tips on exciting upcoming public programming, and details on how you can participate. Thank you very much, and Steve, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kreiner, Professor Karim, and Professor Bateman. Thank you for everything you do. And the entire Institute team in Ithaca, we're very grateful for the work you do. Hello from Thunderstorm, Long Island. I want to welcome you all here. A special welcome to our candidates. Many of you know I served for 16 years in the United States Congress, 8 campaigns for re-election, a couple primaries. I know how brutal it is, and you really do perform a vital public service in your candidacies and your pursuits, so thank you. Very briefly, 1 minute or less, the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University has a very simple mission, and it is to curate political programming that deepens discourse and raises understanding. When I left Congress, unindicted and undefeated, I might add, I was just kind of very anxious about the fact that we live in a country now where everybody seems to be yelling at everybody else and we operate on sound bites. We reject that at the Institute. We really want to delve into issues and promote civil and civic engagement. We are relentlessly nonpartisan. So back in the day when we had people live and in person in one room, we featured the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and also the former White House Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, Reince Priebus. We've since gone virtual, and our virtual platforms have included Republican Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana talking about the importance of federal aid to states like New York as a result of COVID-19, and Senator Amy Klobuchar talking about her legislation to expand access to absentee ballots. We had Len Leifer, the CEO of Regeneron, talking about his company's efforts to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. Mr. Leifer, course, is a Cornellian. And just yesterday, we had Congressman Barney Frank and a leader in the business community talk about Dodd-Frank, the Wall Street regulations and banking and investment regulations that were passed almost exactly 10 years ago. I just want to commend to your attention 2 events that are coming up, and then I'm going to give you our website address. On Monday, we'll be doing a virtual conference featuring 4 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including the Majority Whip, Jim Clyburn, will be engaged in a conversation on race and justice in America. That will be at 5 o'clock on Monday. We urge you to register for that event as quickly as you can. We anticipate having a pretty full audience. So again, that's 4 members of Congress, members of the Congressional Black Caucus talking about race and justice in America. And then on Tuesday, the next day, at 12:30, we'll be doing a bipartisan update on the state of play in the presidential election. For information on those 2 programs and others, we do these events at least once, sometimes twice a week. Please visit us at www.iopga.cornell.edu. That's IOPGA, Institute of Politics and Global Affairs, .cornell.edu. And again, to the candidates, thank you for giving us the benefit of your time and discourse. And with that, Professor Kreiner, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, so I think that is, I'm going to introduce all the candidates.
Please take it away.
No worries, sorry. So I'm going to introduce the candidates and give them each an opportunity for a 2-minute opening statements. We're going to go in alphabetical order by last name, and then we're going to reverse that in the second part of our forum. And I just want to start off by thanking all of you for being here and just by expressing how much we're looking forward to hearing your different perspectives on the issues. So we're going to start off with a 2-minute statement from Sujata Gibson. Sujata, you might have to unmute.
So sorry. Hi, my name is Sujata Gibson. I am a civil rights attorney. I also teach part-time at Cornell Law School. I teach a clinic on civil disobedience defense and also a seminar class on how to make change in democracy, basically. And the answer is civil disobedience helps. But anyway, I've been involved with movements my whole life, and I was a labor organizer. I'm now a movement lawyer. I've worked on legislation and committees at the state level. I've made recommendations to Governor Cuomo on appointment recommendations for the Court of Appeals. But I like to say that my experience out in the streets and making change from the outside is what we need right now, because we're not going to be able to get anywhere with the normal power brokerages. Of what we need to do right now is just so revolutionary, and there's so much work to be done. And throughout history, the only way that happens is when the people are out in the streets demanding it. And I know how to work with movements and make that happen on the inside as well.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn now to Beau Harbin.
Great, thank you. Good evening for the opportunity to speak with everyone. You know, in these uncertain times, the only thing we can be certain of is change. Who expected we'd see a pandemic sweep the globe when this campaign started? Who expected we'd be forced to work from home and try to teach our children over the internet? Therefore, in these uncertain times, what our community and our state need are elected officials who are proven, knowledgeable, adaptable, and principled to adjust to these ever-changing circumstances. As a global IT professional for over 15 years, I am constantly forced to adapt to changing global circumstances, massive technology shifts, client requirements, team members, and more. I calmly led my team through the Great Recession and adjusted our practices to ensure we kept our staff employed. I've adapted to working with individuals across the globe via remote teleworking long before Zooming was a household term. I listen intently to my constituents, to experts, and to others to help guide my decisions. As a county legislator and a minority leader, I have a proven track record of action in our community using this approach. I've advanced pro-environment agenda, even in the face of regular opposition, leading Cortland County on climate change impacts, fighting for renewable energy projects in our community, and more. I fought for our residents to overturn unfunded mandates, fully fund social programs and education, and advocated for increased childcare opportunities on the Parker School Task Force. Finally, I lead with principled convictions and use those to guide me in an ever-changing world. I will always fight for what's right. We must protect our most vulnerable communities, the elderly, LGBTQIA, communities of color, children, and others. We must protect reproductive rights. We must fight for racial justice and equality. We must protect our environment and roll back the effects of climate change. We must do so much more. I'm the candidate who is proven, knowledgeable, adaptable, and principled, and who is best able to adjust to our changing circumstances. This is why, in these uncertain times, I ask for your vote to represent our community in Albany. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind everyone to put themselves on mute if they're not speaking. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Hoeschele. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm sort of the crazy old lady who keeps yelling about everything because I'm so passionate about what's going on in the United States today. This is one of the most important election years of our lives. And it's very important that we're passionate about what we believe in and that we really change the dynamic of what's happening in Albany in particular. It's the time to be bold. We need to pass the New York State Health Act. We have to pass a Green New Deal that actually works. We have to be funding education, and in our rural communities in particular, because often we forget that this is not just an Ithaca district, it's a rural Cortland County district as well, and it's very important that we remember that. I have a background in education. I'm a former high school teacher. I had one of the most thankless jobs in politics, which is school board president in Cortland schools. I worked in public broadcasting. For the past 10 years, I've worked in mental health and addiction services, so I have a unique understanding about how Albany's policies impact people on the ground. I'm not a politician, which is why I'm running for this seat. We often have these great ideals around what we think policy can be, but on the ground, it means nothing if we don't talk to the practitioners that implement those policies. We have been enduring this false 2% tax cap that the governor has imposed on us for the past decade, and it has to stop, because that means that all of that funding need just trickles downhill to the counties and municipalities that can't afford their services any longer. We need to fund Medicaid. We need to fund Medicaid appropriately. We need to fund mental health and addiction services, because they tend to be, unfortunately, the basis for all other problems. That's something I can bring to the table. I bring passionate, careful leadership, and quite frankly, a little bit of humor, because if you can't laugh at yourself, you can't get the job done. And I bring integrity to the process. I want the win-win scenario at every moment, but that does not mean we can't be bold in our principles. That's why I'm running. I think I can help this state and this assembly seat move our community forward in the best way possible.
Thank you very much. We're going to turn it now to Anna Kelles.
Hi, my name is Anna Kelles, and I'm a native of Trumansburg, running for the state assembly in the 25th district. I'm a scientist and a public servant, and I've served on the Tompkins County legislature for the past 5 years, consistently passing legislation improving human health, on protecting the environment. Specifically, I've worked to pass Tobacco 21, a public safety for all sanctuary resolution, and I fought to block the trash incinerator on Cayuga Lake. My focus on human health and the environment will remain strong when I'm in Albany. Right now, we are facing an economic crisis brought on by COVID-19, and our society is reckoning with over 400 years of systemic racial injustice. We must face these challenges head on. The issue we face as a community impacts our neighbors of color at a far higher rate. We must address these inequities. This means that I will prioritize the following issues from day one. First, racial justice. I will fight meaningful reforms to policing policies, breaking the school to prison pipeline, and equity and access to housing and jobs to end centuries of injustice. Second, protecting our environment. I will champion a green workforce as a road to economic recovery through renewable energy and agriculture, electrified transportation, and weatherized buildings. Third, universal health care. I will champion the New York Health Act to provide quality healthcare for all New Yorkers while saving taxpayers money. Over 113,000 Americans have died due to COVID-19. There's no better time to act than now. Fourth, universal childcare. I will fight for early education so every child has a chance at success, while giving parents the freedom to enter the workforce and ensure good paying jobs for childcare providers as well. Finally, housing is a human right. We need policies to keep people in their homes and increase access to affordable housing. I will fight to dismantle racist housing policies and advocate for grant funding and tax incentive programs that increase affordable housing access. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to everyone's questions.
Thank you very much, Anna. We're going to turn it over to Jason Leifer now. Jason, you might need to.
Yep, I got it. Made the famous Zoom faux pas. So, hi, I'm Jason Leifer. I'm the Dryden Town Supervisor, and I'm also an attorney. I've been serving Dryden for 12 years, the last 4.5 as supervisor. And the reason why I'm running is that I like to deliver results for my communities. And I think that what I've done in Dryden on the big issues of climate change, where because of Dryden's efforts, fracking is banned in New York State. We've been an example in fighting climate change by putting in renewable energy with solar farms. We've fought against the further out building of fossil fuel infrastructure by banning the West Dryden pipeline. But I want to hit bigger issues too, such as healthcare, which to bring the New York Health Act into fruition, what that'll do is it'll give better care, it'll lower taxes, and it'll boost our economy by encouraging entrepreneurism. We need to have universal broadband for all of New York State through your municipality, whether it's a town, village, or county. This will level the playing field for education. It'll bring more jobs to New York State, and it'll bring a lot more equity, and it'll allow for things that we've experienced during COVID, such as telehealth, which will expand access to mental health services and other services. still relies on a property tax to fund schools. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be relying on a progressive income tax like we used to. Living wage, we need to pay people a living wage. There's a lot of talk about the heroes during this crisis, but the fact is we don't pay them enough, and that's why people rely on so many social services just to get by. You shouldn't have to do that. If you're working a full-time job, you should be able to earn enough to pay your bills, save a little bit, put your kids through school. So I believe I'm the candidate to do that. I've shown that I can bring results on big issues for my community, whether it's telecommunications, climate change, and I'm looking forward for hoping that you will cast your vote for me in this primary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. Jordan Lesser.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to participate tonight. Much of my career has been focused on public service and an inherent interest in policy to help our community. I worked as a national park ranger in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina, and I could see the communities it destroyed, and I could see how it brought hardship to people's lives. And I knew at that moment that I wanted to focus on real solutions to prevent that kind of government failure. That by going to law school and specializing in environmental law and understanding where our systems have ingrained inequalities like the wage gap, gender discrimination, and racial disparities, I could work for a better future for us all. At that point, I returned to my hometown of Ithaca, and I reached out to Assemblywoman Lifton with this passion to make a difference. I began working with her at the onset of the hydrofracking battle, and I was a key player at the highest level of state policymaking, as well as the local zoning lawsuit in Dryden. My work on fracking let our community lead the state, set an example for the nation and the world, how to push back against the destruction of our water, our landscape, and economy at the hands of big oil and gas. Fighting climate change and environmental harms, including harmful algal blooms, is a core value of mine. I alone have the expertise, the relationships in Albany, and the ability to immediately make a difference to protect our community and our planet. I will not let you down. I want to ask you now, what do you want to see in a leader during these uncertain times? It's clear we're facing a recession due to COVID-19, which has put many out of work. We have families struggling and difficult state budgets are looming. This is not the time to take a risk with an elected official who doesn't know how to navigate the complex maze of Albany and to accomplish our goals. It can take several years to even successfully understand the budget process. I've been at the table working for Assemblywoman Lifton for 10 years as her legal counsel. I know how to advocate for the district as I have been for you for all this time. And I will continue to fight for you in Albany. So I ask for your support in this primary. This is not the time to take a risk. I can be the most effective candidate for you starting in January. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Now we're going to turn it off to our last panelist, Seth Murtagh.
Hi, thanks. And thank you for organizing this opportunity to speak to the public tonight. My name is Seth Murtagh. I got my start in politics back in 2008. I was an organizer for the Working Families Party in the Finger Lakes region, managed a state Senate race we narrowly lost. And I also worked on a statewide initiative to raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers to stave off some of the worst effects of the financial recession. In 2011, I ran for a seat on the Ithaca Common Council and I got elected. I've served on the council for the last 8 years. I chair one of the 2 standing committees, the Planning and Economic Development Committee. I'm also the City of Ithaca's alternate acting mayor. I've led on legislation, large and small, as part of a task force that produced a new sidewalk law that has built or improved over 5 miles of new sidewalk in the city. I've been a champion for affordable housing and also for walkable neighborhoods. For the last 5 years, I've also worked in the office of Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton as her communications coordinator. And in that role, I've gotten to know the 125th Assembly District. I've worked with community leaders all across the district, from the village of Trumansburg to the city of Cortland on their plans to purchase and renovate the former Parker School as a new site for childcare providers. Obviously, this is an incredibly difficult time for our state as we continue to grapple with the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. I think my number one priority is making sure that any proposed cuts don't fall on the most vulnerable people in our state. I think we have to look at pushing for the wealthiest New Yorkers to pay more so that the burden doesn't fall on our school kids, on people with disabilities, on our elderly. And longer term, I think that we need to make sure that we're keeping in track with the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, achieving our goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and move the state to 100% renewable energy. I think we need to pass the New York State Health Act to provide universal health care for all our citizens. And I think that we need to fund our schools fairly. We have terrible problems in this state with inequities in education. I think we need to make sure that the campaign for fiscal equity, the full phase in of that funding is made available. And thank you.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask each candidate to respond to a series of pre-collected questions that have been collected from the audience. Each candidate will have 1 minute, and we're going to go in the same order as before. First, however, I want to remind all audience members that they have the opportunity to submit any additional questions that they want to ask using the Q&A function. We have a few questions asked already, and we hope that you will, over the course of this forum, ask more. We might not be able to get all the questions, but we'll do our best. I also want to remind everyone that the candidates have participated in earlier forums on environmental and racial justice. Many of tonight's questions are going to touch on these themes as well, and we invite you, however, to check out the public recordings of these forums for more in-depth engagement. So we're going to start off with our first question, and this is the one that came up from a variety of our attendees. What specific actions would you take in Albany to support the Black community and deal with anti-Blackness in our political and police institutions, including holding police more accountable, stopping racial profiling, and more generally establishing that First Nations, Brown, LGBTQ, poor, and Black lives matter? First, we're going to start off with Sujata. Sujata, you have to unmute, sorry.
2 for 2. I think we need radical change. We need to dismantle white supremacy. And so it needs to be the primary focus. I think we really need to look beyond reforms with the police, because reforms haven't worked. We've tried them and they don't work. The police, the origin of our police state comes at the expense of Black people and to target Black people. I think, you know, I've really, I feel that I was at the reform stage a while back, and then I was at the defunding stage, but I'm starting to get to the point where, maybe not overnight, but we need to work towards abolishing the police state, decarceration, radical transformations of society, so we're not criminalizing one another and using that as a basis for our understanding of how we get along. We can be funding you know, community programs, social workers, mental health, healthcare, addiction, not treating addiction as a crime, but really understanding it as something that needs support and healing. And then in all these other arenas, I mean, white supremacy is a cancer. You stomp it out one place and it's somewhere else. So we need to be talking about our foster care system, our CPS system, what we're doing to really honor, you said Indigenous people, like what are we really doing to honor Indigenous people and their treaties? What as a state can we do? And there are things that we can do, even as the federal government, you know, does pretty terrible things like appoint representatives to a nation and who aren't the condoled chiefs. So those are, you know, the starts, but there's so much else. We need to really invest in our people instead of our big corporations. We need to make sure that everybody has affordable housing, everybody has a job who wants one, that we're weatherizing our homes, growing food, investing in education properly, investing in things that will empower community and people to, I'm out of time, but there's a lot we could do and need to do now.
Thank you so much. Beau Harbin?
Sure, and this is a really important question, regardless of when, but certainly in this time. You know, the first thing we have to do is we have to listen. We have to listen to the voices of our minority communities, of our Native communities, LGBTQ and others, to hear what they are struggling with and what they need from us who are in positions of power to affect change, either at the local level or at the state level. And in listening to their voices, there are a number of things that have already been addressed by the legislature, which I applaud, the repeal of 50A, the Safer New York Act, and others. But there are others that we need to make sure that we strengthen. We need to make sure that we don't go backwards on bail reform. At the beginning of this campaign, we heard a lot of voices saying bail reform is bad. And I've stood firm to say, no, bail reform is key to help moving forward. Another key element that we have to move forward on that hasn't been addressed is the legalization of adult use cannabis. And along with that, we have to, A, make sure that the funds from adult use cannabis go to our most disaffected communities. And B, we need to make sure that we go back and expunge convictions, unfair convictions on minor marijuana and cannabis charges going back decades. We need to clear the slate for individuals. And then lastly, we need to demilitarize the police and increase our police training.
Thank you very much, Beau. We're going to turn it over to Lisa Hoeschele now.
So first of all, we should really make sure we're teaching the history of the Black community. No more textbooks from Texas. We should be really taking into consideration our own curriculum when it comes to New York State and making sure we're teaching those things that people need to know so they recognize inherent bias in the system and how it goes all the way back to the end of slavery. I think that's important. I think, you know, making sure we're teaching the police and forcing the state to create funding sources for bias and de-escalation training. We've talked about this before in Cortland County. We have expended the money out of our funds at our clinic to train all of the city police department in anti-bias and de-escalation training, and it really has had a positive impact and created a community policing model. I think, you know, making sure that we provide funding from demilitarization into the mental health and addictions community is very, very important, specifically because, as I've said before, you've all heard it, we're treating mental illness in jail, and jails are not mental health clinics, nor should they be. We have people who are literally in jail detoxing from opiates. So because we've waited to treat the problem instead of preventing the problem, we've had some we're seeing absolutely no forward movement. Finally, again, we need to be taxing the rich in an appropriate way that allows for all of the services that we value to be a part of our community budgets.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're going to turn it over to Anna now. And I'd just like to remind you all again, once again, if you're not on the screen, you should mute yourselves.
Hi, I think there's been some really good answers. I would second legalizing adult use cannabis. That's super important. And also expunging past records specifically related to that. We need to dismantle white supremacy in every single system that we have. One thing that I will note, and I think needs to be prioritized, is that 10 bills passed through the legislature, state legislature today. And those include the STAT Act and repealing 50A. There's a whole series. 50A would be to open up records and to make sure that statistics on demographics, anyway, you know, there's 10 diverse, but they need funding. It's one thing to have them on the record. We need to make sure that every single one of them are sufficiently funded so that they can be enforced. So that's very important. I also want to prioritize an anti-racist curriculum in schools. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of education on Black and Brown history that is not being taught, and that is creating structural racism that is then generationally passed on. So those are a few things, but I want to stay to my 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to turn it over now to Jason. Jason, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. What we need to do to improve, you know, the lives of our VI, POC, and LGBTQIA communities is, one, education. The histories, the accurate histories need to be taught, like Lisa said, none of these textbooks from Texas. Two, we need to fully fund our pre-K all the way through college education and do something about student debt, because people, they can't really participate in our economy fully and even buy a home when they're saddled with student debt or unable to take full-time jobs. Three, we need to end this drug war and mass incarceration. That includes legalizing adult use marijuana. And then when you have the licensing for processing and sales, they need to be directed towards communities that have been traditionally marginalized and also victimized by the drug war. Four, we have to enforce laws that already prohibit discrimination. To need for policing and qualified immunity, legislate the duty to intervene, and prohibit things like warrior training. And that will actually clean up the culture of policing so that there is less violence. Defunding to have more social services towards things like mental health counseling and transitional housing. Changing the culture of violence will produce the best results to prevent George Floyd or Breonna Taylor.
Thank you very much, Jason. We're going to turn it over to Jordan now.
Yeah, thanks very much. You know, it's very clear that the killing of George Floyd exposed once again the severe racial inequalities in our policing system. And I support all the changes the legislature just made. As I wrote in a piece on my website the other day, you know, a lot of those bills had unfortunately been there for years and had languished because we weren't listening to and hadn't built the political will within, you know, coming from the Black, Hispanic, and Puerto Rican caucus to say, yes, these are real issues in communities of people of color. I'm very glad to see that quick change. But let's be clear what we're really talking about here. We're talking about systemic underfunding and systemic biases within many aspects of our community. This includes education. You know, the clearest, quickest way to improve someone's life is to grant them equal access to education. This is why I will fight to fully fund our schools, including through the foundation formula, which is tailored to target minority communities, underfunded schools, which we know don't have the property tax base to self-fund their schools the way we see other wealthy communities. I will fight for this every year, and I will also make sure that we have robust training pipelines to keep our talented students who have graduated from schools here in New York and that they're able to get employed and remain here in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordan. We're going to turn it over to Seth now.
I actually want to echo something that Beau said earlier about the importance of listening. And I think that's especially true for someone who looks like me, to listen to the voices of Black citizens. And on Monday, actually, I organized, or was helped to organize a forum with local Black leaders. And one thing that really stuck with me from that forum was the quote, "The battlefield is everywhere." And it really is. I mean, it touches on policing, it touches on education, it touches on healthcare. And so I think we need to look at the energy that's out there right now with all of these demonstrations. And I know that all of us have participated in demonstrations across the 125th Assembly District. I think there's a real opportunity to harness this energy for progressive change. And I agree that we are seeing a lot more bills being passed, a lot more legislation being passed. And part of that is an increase in political will in the state legislature. We've elected more Black legislators, we've elected more Democrats. I think those are very positive trends. It's brought us the bail reform that we saw. It's brought us the policing bills that have passed just today. And I think we need to continue on that. I think we need to look at passing the New York Health Act to end inequities in our healthcare system, and also look at ending inequities in our education system.
Thank you very much, Seth. We're going to turn on to the second question. I'm going to remind everyone that they have 60 seconds and that we will sort of call them to that. So our second question was raised by several of our attendees, and they asked a variety of questions relating to immigration and to New York State's enforcement of and cooperation with federal immigration officers. So the question is, what types of solutions will you pursue in Albany to try and eradicate immigration enforcement abuses, including racial profiling and ICE presence and arrests at state courses as a couple examples of such abuses? We'll start with Sujata. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a huge issue. I work in court, and it's been very scary for a lot of my clients in family court and in criminal court proceedings, and the supporters that come. So we absolutely have to have big buffer zones, at the very least, around places like courthouses and many more places. But I'd like to look at ways, and I have to be honest, I haven't looked into it yet, the exact mechanism, but I'd like to look at ways of ejecting ICE entirely from our state. And I know that there's going to be a huge tussle over that, but we certainly shouldn't be inviting them, inviting Homeland Security in further. Every time we take additional funding, you know, as some of my colleagues have, Anna and Seph have both agreed to take from Homeland Security, or do things like expand the airport and add a Homeland Security office there, we're inviting them into our community, and there's consequences to that.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Beau now.
Yeah, the issue of ICE is an important one. And I think there are a number of things that we could do at Albany. I mean, ultimately, ICE reports up at the federal level. But in Albany, we need to make sure that we establish appropriate buffers for our courthouses and other locations where individuals need to come and transact day-to-day business, whether or not their immigration status is established. This is why I also was one of the big proponents in Cortland County to support the Green Light Initiative, which helped establish a safer opportunity for individuals without documentation to receive a driver's license. Doesn't give them the right to vote, but it gave them a driver's license, and it helps make our roads safer. And we really need voices in Albany that are going to push back hard against the Trump agenda to make sure that that 100-mile border that gives ICE immunity, or in Customs and Border Enforcement kind of immunity to go throughout our community, gets shrunk, they get demilitarized, and they focus on the key items that they need to focus on with regards to having a safe immigration, but not an overactive immigration policy.
Thank you very much, Beau. We'll turn it over to Lisa now.
Yes, absolutely appropriate buffers. You know, people are not illegal. We have to make sure that they feel safe here in our communities. And I think it's indicative of the situation right now that our budget is so badly adjusted that we have to worry about the Trump administration holding us financially hostage because we can't support the immigrant population for fear of losing funding from the federal government. I think we really need to push the federal government and our congressional delegation harder on guest worker programs in Albany. I think we should be looking at ourselves as a sanctuary state. And if we had the funding and weren't being held you know, completely by the scruff of the neck by the Trump administration, we could absolutely do that. I think we should also be working with our church communities in making sure we're providing safe haven for some people who are, for example, in Cortland County, the bus stop is right across the street from a church. We had ISIS come into Cortland County, right in front of the Cortland County office building, and pull an immigrant off the bus and start to shake that person down. If that individual had known that the church across the street would have been able to help that person and provide sanctuary, those are the types of out-of-the-box things that we should start thinking about.
Thank you very much. Turn it over to Anna.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do. I've been working on this issue for many years. When I joined the legislature, I actually, when our current president was elected, I wrote the legislation with a constitutional lawyer professor at Cornell. We collectively, it was the first sanctuary county resolution in the state, and it was actually used across the entire country. I also passed the Green Light legislation. I co-chair a network of progressive elected officials at the state level, and immigration reform has been central to the work that we've done. Right now, we're lobbying for the Protect Our Courts Act, which is the buffer around courts. But there are other actions I think that really need to be taken. Law enforcement needs to be held accountable. We are a sanctuary state, we're a sanctuary county, and the division of labor and power needs to be maintained. There are other things, expanding Excelsior to add Dreamers to the Excelsior program. Integrating of immigrants by funding ESL programs and housing and integration and workforce development. And the last is education. ICE can't go onto private properties and making sure that, for example, farmers understand this and protecting farm workers.
Thank you very much. We'll turn it over to Jason now. Jason, you have to unmute yourself, sorry.
Yeah, all right, so this is more than about erecting physical barriers. It's actually about erecting barriers to the records in both family court and criminal court. Because in family court, just simply making admissions in a petition or responding to a petition if you become part of family treatment court for some reason, or if you get involved into a support proceeding, or you have a family offense proceeding, the DHS can apply to get those records, and that can do things like cause someone to be eligible for deportation or lose eligibility just for a green card. But on the criminal law side, what you need to have are DA's offices who understand that a minor offense shouldn't be penalized by deportation. And many times it's the DA who's in charge and the policies that they have that will dictate what happens to somebody. We had, there was someone in this community years ago, I believe he may have owned a restaurant. He was deported because of a drug offense. And that should never happen. We're not talking about violent offenses here. If we're talking about ending the drug war, mass incarceration, and everything else, we need to have our DAs on board. So if someone does violate a law, they're not published, they're not punished in such a way that it is cruel and unusual through deportation. And that's more than just erecting. That takes more effort than simply calling ourselves a sanctuary city, county, or state. It's actually erecting legal barriers to DHS.
Thank you very much. Jordan.
Yeah, you know, the best thing we can do to improve our immigration practice in the state is to make a change in the White House in November. That's very clear. But, you know, I will say that we also have sort of a cross-section about who supports immigration reform in the state. It was surprising to see even the New York State Business Council come out in favor of the green light law. You know, it's clear to many businesses across the state that immigrants, you know, either here on temporary visas or here with undocumented status, are critical to our state's economy, often in the agricultural sector. So let's not act like we don't all depend every single day on the hard work these people are doing for our food supply. And, you know, a lot of things we take for granted are being done by immigrants of various types. But what we need to do is reaffirm our commitment as a state to asylum. A lot of these people who are coming to our country are here legally. They're here because they're fleeing genocide. They're fleeing threat to their bodily selves from countries across you know, the world. We need to fund a legal system to make sure everyone's rights are being listened to and furthered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last on this question is going to be Seth.
So after Trump was elected, I helped to draft and pass the sanctuary city law at the city level. It's kind of the city version of the law that Anna mentioned. Basically just means that our city police are not going to cooperate with federal authorities. And, you know, I think ultimately we need the autonomy to enforce our immigration laws. I mean, we have been embroiled with all kinds of battles with the federal government over the green light bill, for instance, with the Trump administration trying to withhold Medicaid funding. You know, I think the green light bill is a great step for the state. I think it was incredibly important. We need a path so that we can bring people who have been here for, in some cases, many, many years, that we can give them the full citizenship that they deserve. And that if you think about the coronavirus pandemic and how it's impacted particularly service workers, particularly restaurant workers, you know, these are people, undocumented people who are not eligible for enhanced unemployment benefits, for instance. I mean, they pay taxes in their job, but they're not getting the help that a lot of other workers in this country are getting. And I think that's unconscionable. And I think it needs to change. I think we need to have a pathway to give our undocumented workers in this state the full citizenship they deserve.
All right, thank you very much. So again, to remind you, 60 seconds. We're doing pretty good on time, but we want to stay on time. So the third question that we have concerns higher education. With Cornell University, Ithaca College, and TC3, higher education is a huge employer in the district. Each of these schools is currently trying to figure out how to resume its operations, given the coronavirus situation. A delayed reopening or one with fewer students and reduced activities will have considerable economic consequences. But going back to normal will impose significant health risks to the entire community. How do you envision working with these institutions and the municipalities in which they're located? And how will you advocate for them and their issues in Albany? Again, we'll start off with Sujata.
Well, I want to sit down with all of the institutions you mentioned, and also, of course, Cortland, SUNY Cortland, and the other institutions, and brainstorm the best way to meet the need while also taking care of everybody else in the state who is similarly devastated. You know, we've had a global economic meltdown, and there's not really an end in sight right now. So I think I know from my work with Cornell, and I used to be the president of the student body at TC3 and on many committees, and that you know, that everybody is sensitive to that and wants to be a team player. So I think if we sit down and talk about ways to make sure that gaps are covered and that safety is handled appropriately, I want to hear from you basically, and I'll help support that in consideration with the greater community as well.
Thank you very much. Beau.
Well, I don't have to guess how this is going to work because I'm actually directly engaged with SUNY Cortland on this issue of how we're going to safely reopen SUNY Cortland in our community to provide the education that SUNY provides to our students, but do it in a safe manner that we can bring people back together. We've been meeting as a committee, and we have plans to meet throughout the summer to work together in a town gown fashion to make sure that we have this covered right. There are lots of options available to the university, to the city, and to the county as to how we can work together to make this work. And it's going to take a cooperation across all three. Because we saw when things shut down, it had a significant economic impact on our community. But we also saw some of the impacts that happened when we had graduation, and a whole bunch of families came from upstate or from downstate for graduation, and masks and other things were an issue. And so we have to work together in a partnership to understand the impact and to find the best way forward. But health is going to be the most critical issue. We can't just simply reopen everything and hope that for the best. So it's going to take a working group, which I'm a part of, to make sure that we do it in a directed and logical fashion with the town and the city.
Thank you so much. Lisa.
So, you know, this isn't going to just go away. So whatever plans are created must be flexible in case we do see a resurgence of the virus, which we're talking very much is possible in the fall, especially as people become more careless and decide not to wear masks. So I do think that convening the higher educational institutions of all of the educational institutions in the 125th, not just Cortland, not just Ithaca, not just Cornell, not just TC3, and sharing strategies for how we make sure that everyone comes back safely. I know SUNY Cortland is talking about, for example, one possibility of bringing students back in September and then having them stay with no break until they leave at Thanksgiving and staying home. I think we need to look creatively at density. Maybe some students can have an entire semester that is online and as compared to another semester that is completely on site. But I think, again, Sujata is correct too. We need to talk to and have the leaders of these organizations get together, brainstorm best practices, and use that as a model for, to some extent, as to how we open elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, because this is not just a higher education issue. It's an education issue.
Thank you very much. Anna.
Hi, yes, I chair the Economic Development Committee at the Tompkins County Legislature. So I've been meeting weekly with Cornell, and I think it's important to know, to just identify that there are a lot of logistics that need to be addressed. Specifically, how do you bring all of the students at once onto campus into the community? What is the potential risk of a peak of infection? How do you coordinate with the community so that all the students get all their needs met on campus and don't necessarily have to leave again because it's the leaving and coming? How do you deal with the transportation of getting everyone to campus and home on breaks? Do you have the breaks? Do you change the schedule? So, you know, there are a lot of logistics that need to be addressed. And then there's also the issue of coordinating between the colleges and how you are coordinating online education and in-class education. So I think it's a matter of coordinating between the colleges and making sure that whatever funding resources, online education resources, are coordinated and connected to the state program and funding that they're investing right now to try and keep colleges and universities engaged and coming back to session in the fall.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, so this is where from Albany, you're going to need to provide funding for these contact tracing and also testing programs. My understanding is that Cornell is working on a plan to actually test everyone who gets on campus. Because they do have labs and things there and equipment that I don't believe that IC, TC3 or even SUNY, Cortland might have, but so they're going to have that available to them. But it's also going to require working with county health departments on expanded testing for the larger community. It's all money, and that's really where you come in at the state. As far as employers go, though, we're going to need to revisit our sick time policies, because if somebody is told to self-quarantine after a test and their job is not one that can be done remotely, the last thing you want is for them to go back to work before they should. So we need to really, at a state level, maybe mandate expanded sick leave time.
Thank you very much. Jordan.
Sure. One of the first things we're going to need to do in Albany in January is pressure our federal government to take real action to provide money to state and local government. I certainly hope it happens long before January, but the state by law has to keep a balanced budget. We, cannot literally print money like the federal government can and give it out to local and state economies. This is something critical to keep every sector of our economy afloat, of our community afloat, and that very well may include higher education. But, I've been working with leaders at all of our local institutions for years. I have a strong working relationship with the higher education chairwoman. So I believe, I can go into Albany and, begin to have these conversations. How are we going to do this long term? I think each college is going to need to look at, what makes sense from each of their own perspectives. However, we need to realize that this isn't just going to be a localized issue. And my time's up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Turn it over to Seth.
So one of the things that really struck me, as a member of the Common Council, when Cornell announced their closure, and that really was the trigger that caused the other institutions of higher education to close. It was like a shockwave went through the community. And the reason is that we are so attached economically to these institutions. I think that's true of Cortland, and it's also true of Tompkins County. And the challenge we're facing now is, how do we weather this crisis when it impacts landlords, it impacts renters, it impacts small businesses? And there's two main things that need to happen. I think there needs to be additional aid coming from both the state and the federal government to help our institutions of higher education, and also our local municipalities. And then the second thing is something Jason mentioned earlier, is a robust federal and state plan to increase contact tracing and increase testing. Because the truth is that we're going to be living with this virus for the foreseeable future. We can't just shut down the economy for 18 months and pray that a vaccine is discovered. We have to figure out how to live with this virus more intelligently. And I think if we do that, we're going to be able to weather this crisis.
Thank you so much. Our final question before we go to intermission concerns workplace and workplace safety, concerns specifically worker protections. OSHA has completely abdicated responsibility for keeping workplaces safe. What concrete steps will you take to make sure all workers in New York State are safe on the job? Start again with Sujata.
Well, I think we need to do a lot with that. First of all, it doesn't make any sense that we structured it so that our essential workers, who are often the most disadvantaged and the most at risk health-wise, don't have a choice of whether to go back to work or not, regardless of how old they are or their underlying health conditions or their other risk factors. So we've essentially placed the biggest burden on people who have the most risk. We should definitely be expanding sick time, but also putting in place measures so that those essential workers can opt out, and can remain on the unemployment program for a while, or sick time or something expanded, so that they can have meaningful access to funds and not be forced to go back to work or lose access to that. We need to be tying worker protections in terms of protections, but also wages to all state funds expenditures. So we could have, the time's up, but anyway, so we need prevailing wage to be a part of any state money.
Thank you so much. Beau.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we've seen that OSHA has abdicated its responsibility, and it's up on us, you know, at the state and local level to make sure that our workers are safe. You know, one of the things that we can do to do this is you know, make sure that we really help to reinvigorate the union movement. We've seen a decimation of unions across the state and across the country over the past decades, and they fight every day for worker rights. They fight for their union rights, and this is a big part of it. And one of the things that passing the New York Health Act will allow unions to do is they no longer have to fight and concentrate on getting health care for the union members. They can actually fight on the important things like worker safety, like having a living wage for their members, that are going to be critically important to push back against employers who do not take the health and welfare of their workers into account. So there's a couple of things that I think we need to do. We do need to expand sick leave coverage and make sure that it's covered for not only yourself as an employee, but also the family that you have to take care of.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn it to Lisa now.
You know, one of the problems with going in the middle is everybody else has what you wanted to say. So absolutely agree with Beau about stronger unions, and absolutely with the Healthcare Act, they will have more time to be able to pay attention to this as people who can protect their own people and know what their people need for protection. I think we need to have more punitive laws around violations. If we think that OSHA has no longer served any use for our people, then we need to change that, and somebody needs to get in there and revamp OSHA. And revamp a statewide effort to make sure that we're providing those services if they are needed. And I think we need to fund options for safety for those people who are employers, so that they feel that they don't have to short their own profits in order to keep, you know, the profits coming at the same time that they're not protecting their own employees. So, you know, again, we have this economic situation where we're not supporting the things that we care about. We're not legislating the things that we care about. And so it's a free-for-all, and we need to be stronger in Albany and push back more strongly against Governor Cuomo and make sure we're giving him the tools that he needs to do the job.
Thank you so much. Anna.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some really important things have been said. I think that I would add, I've been on the picket line with unions for like 7-8 years, and although their healthcare is often, much better than the average person, they have other rights that they are not able to really advocate for. And so across the board, one of the biggest ones they talk about is employer safety. And not being able to get that to happen, project labor agreements and making sure that it has worker safety embedded in that can happen if we push for project labor agreements on all public projects, for one. Protocols and practices, making sure they're in place, but holding employers accountable for criminal cases in which there are cases that arise where there's worker issues of harm or injury. Sick leave and family leave, both maternal and paternal, that should be, enforced, and employers should be held accountable if they do not follow through and support those. So I think there are a lot of important steps that need to be taken, but enforcement is really important.
Thank you so much. Jason.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to talk about. Enforcement is really the most important thing statewide in many agencies, not just for workplaces. The state has not funded enforcement to the Labor Department. So, and specifically with COVID, for instance, the attitude now seems to be that we're just going to educate people. What happened during this election, I had to intervene in a situation and actually following the rules for social distancing and sanitation. They were there, literally couldn't leave. And, this person who contacted me was terrified because they had their own health reasons for not being able to really stand a COVID infection. But the thing is that when I contacted agencies that could do something, they didn't really want to do the enforcement side of things. And these are agencies that routinely for food that's not at the right temperature. So, but in further, can I just tack on a little bit to what Anna was talking about? Things like larger projects like IDAs and that involve state contracts or IDA build in protections for workers, because sometimes hammer of the state what I'd be willing to do.
Thank you very much. Jordan.
Sure, I agree with much of what's been said already about strengthening unions and healthcare. But one thing no one's discussed is the risk that workers in certain sectors face that we're frankly not paying enough attention to. And this involves emerging contaminants. We have looked at things like PFOAs, PFOS. This is a very harmful toxic chemical that we know thousands of people across the state and many more across the country have worked with, that has caused cancer. I don't know if you've seen the movie Dark Waters, for example, that made it more accessible. But this is a very real issue in New York State. We've worked on legislation to make sure that firefighters have a presumption if they get cancer during their career, that this is because of firefighting foam that they were forced to interact with regularly, that they're unless proven otherwise, this cancer is from their work duties, from their interaction with chemicals that they're forced to use on the job every single day. We need to take a hard look if we're doing enough for the workers of our state and making sure all of us are protected from contaminants in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth.
So one of the disadvantages of going last is that everybody has said what you wanted to say. So, I agree certainly with what's been said, and certainly strengthening unions and sick leave. One thing, is when you're campaigning is people come to you with problems that you didn't really know much about. And one thing I've heard about in this campaign is the problem with workers' compensation at the state level. There are huge problems with this, with workers who are injured on the job getting compensated. The workers' comp board sometimes can hold up claims for a long time, or they don't sufficiently pay out claims. And I think that, there needs to be a real hard look at reform. There's a big, very powerful trial attorney lobby in Albany, and they've really sort of invested in the status quo, staying as the status quo. And I think, I would like to, one of the reasons I'm interested in serving on the Labor Committee is to take a hard look at this issue.
Thank you so much. All right, now we're going to take a 5-minute break, a bit of an intermission. While we're on break, however, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Sabrina Karim, who will go over some of the changes to this year's voting procedures. So everybody can take 5. We will reconvene at 8:11. Thank you.
Great. I was just waiting for the slide, and here we have some information about this year's primary election. As you know, there's been a lot of issues with how this primary was going to be run. There was a court case, and lots of things were happening. And so we just wanted to take some time to clarify and give some information about exactly how to vote. So to give you an idea, there's 2 ballots. You should receive a presidential primary ballot and a state ballot. Now, again, this is for the Democratic primary race only. And there is a different process for if you want a mail-in ballot that has been authorized. So everybody who is a registered Democrat should be able to get a mail-in ballot, but the process for that is to submit an application. And everybody should have received an application in the mail. June 16th is the last day to submit that application. And then once you have submitted the application, you should receive these 2 ballots, the presidential primary ballot and the state ballot. And you have until June 22nd to submit those by mail. Now, if you don't want to vote by mail, then you can vote early. So early voting starts June 13th and runs until June 21st. There's 2 locations that are listed here. There's varying hours of operation, so I would recommend that you look into the times if you do want to early vote. And then election day is June 23rd, and polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So there is regular voting. You can go in person if you still would like to do that. Finally, just a quick note that there's also school board election that's going on with the Ithaca School District, and those ballots are due June 16th. You should have been mailed those ballots. There is the school board, and then also there's a vote for the budget. So lots of things going on in our community, but it is a little bit more of a complicated process this year. So just take a little bit of time. It took me as a professor in political science a few minutes to figure out how to make sure to do everything right. So please take a look, and we've provided some resources at the bottom of this page here. And we will be back shortly. Great, okay. I think we're just waiting on a few people to come back. I hope everybody got a chance to rest for a minute. I know this is a marathon session, but I hope this is the last one. I think this is the last town hall, if I'm not mistaken.
So far, still some time.
Yep, 1 more hour for the campaign season, I think, for all of us. I think I'll miss you all, you know.
We can still Zoom if you want.
There you go.
Oh, please, yes, let's have a beer over Zoom.
The Assembly Brady
fun.
Bunch. Yeah. Anyone have 5 to 6 hours on?
Yep.
Let's have dinner parties where we each get to have 1 minute for each.
Do like a group cooking show.
Okay, I think that is everyone. Okay, excellent. So welcome back, and I will be taking over the second half. I've been trying to do as much as I can to follow the different forums, and so my goal is to try to ask questions that are slightly different from what we've been seeing so far. And I'll just mention for the participants, as David mentioned earlier, there was a racial justice forum that was excellent before this town hall. So that I recommend everybody going to watch that. I think that's on the Southside community, Southside Center community Facebook page. There's also a great panel or forum on environmental justice that I recommend people go seek out, and 3 Democratic Party forum town halls, if I'm not mistaken. So lots of conversation going on with all these 7 excellent candidates. So that being said, this is going to be run the same way as the previous round, where you'll each get a minute. I don't know if we'll go to the 9 p.m. mark. That's a long time. I'll have 2 questions that I've taken from people that have asked questions in the Q&A. And then also I'm going to do a little bit of a lightning round kind of thing. I think we've seen that model and it's worked a little bit well as the very last question. And then you'll each get a minute to do your closing statements. This time around, we are going to go in reverse alphabetical order by last name. And so we're going to start with Seph, followed by Jordan, and then Jason, and then Anna, and then Lisa, and then Beau, and then Sujata. Okay, so let me ask the first question, which is, the disabled community is consistently growing. What do you feel is the current state of the 125th district in terms of disability rights, and how can it move into a more progressive direction? So we will start with Seth.
You know, I think one of the biggest challenges we see with services to people with disabilities is the question of funding, both for the staff staff organizations that serve people with disabilities, making sure that they're being adequately paid, making sure that their staff are retained and trained correctly. And, you know, we've had really big challenges over the years, and especially with minimum wage increases upstate, with making sure that funding is getting to these organizations. I think that's even more critical now with everything that's going on with the coronavirus pandemic. And I think, you know, as we have all said repeatedly throughout this campaign, we really need to be looking at increasing taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers so that we can pay for the critical services that people with disabilities depend on throughout the Assembly District.
Great. All right, Jordan.
Sure, you know, I fundamentally believe that a hallmark of our society is how we treat those who are the most vulnerable among us. And I think, you know, New York's absolutely not doing enough for the disabled in our community. You know, I've been happy to support over the years various programs which pay for allowing for someone to renovate their home so they can maybe get a wheelchair in, so they can continue to have independence in their lives. They can continue to live how they want to. You know, this is something I would hope to fund, increase the funding for, as well as for independent living centers. You know, we need to make sure that we as a state and society aren't simply just making the decisions for others as to how they're going to live. Oh, you're disabled? Well, then that means you are going to be going into an institution, or you're going to get care how we decide for you. So I will support those initiatives, as well as increased home health aides and letting families, you know, make decisions about what home health aides do and how they operate. Again, it's all about giving choice to those who may not have as much of a voice in our community.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Jason.
I keep doing that. Sorry. One of the biggest areas where there's actually discrimination and with people with both mental health and physical disabilities is in pay. The law actually allows employers to pay those employees less because many times they're taking advantage of tax break programs, and that just is not right. When it comes to housing, you know, Jordan mentioned that there's funding available for rehabilitation and renovations, and that's good, but things like housing codes can require newer housing to already have accommodations made for people with disabilities. When it comes to funding services that they require, again, it's just you need to go where the revenue is, where the states refuse to go for decades, like Seth mentioned. I mean, I think we all support these kind of things. It's just a matter of making sure that they actually happen. And when it comes to families caring for their loved ones and even friends sometimes, while they can certainly take medical leave, they should also be able to be paid for it. They shouldn't have to necessarily do it for free, and the state does have a program that allows that. So that
I think that's time anyway, so we will we'll just let Jason come back for the next question. Sorry, Jason, that was time anyway. Okay, we go to Anna.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's been touched on that's absolutely critical is that independence centers are properly funded. They have not had seen an increase in funding for over 5 years. That's really critical, but there are programs that exist that are, again, underfunded that need to be prioritized, like the Consumer Direct Personal Assistance Program, which helps individuals with disabilities take control and have a say in their own care and have that care be at home. We are an employer-first model state, and yet we have not been investing in those initiatives that would allow for businesses to create the environment and the infrastructure and incorporate the practices that would allow for people with disabilities to work there. There are small business tax credits for employers that hire people with disabilities that are underfunded. The visitability tax credit program so that people can renovate their homes to allow for people with disabilities to visit and leave their own homes. Access to home program that would allow for people to renovate their own homes. There are many programs, every single one of them is underfunded. So I think it's really important that we identify them and we fund them properly.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
Yes, it is all about the funding. We can't provide home care services without shorting our staff on healthcare because we can't afford to provide them with healthcare when we're being reimbursed at a fraction of what it costs us to provide a unit of service. Staffing is huge. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem across the spectrum of mental health addictions and certainly the OPWDD community. Self-directed care is very, very important. The Justice Center has become a weapon of retribution against individual organizations that are providing services. I don't think that we should get rid of the Justice Center by any means, but it needs to be reined in. It's not helpful. It's in fact impacting negatively on a lot of developmental disabilities organizations from providing services. And it's funny, we've had all of these meetings. There's not been one sign translator at any of these forums. That's indicative of something that we need to address. Finally, I'm happy to hire those with disabilities in my clinic, but if I have to create adaptive services, there's nothing that provides me additional funding for that. So I wanted to hire a blind individual in my clinic, but I had to pay for adaptive equipment that was not paid for, or a deaf clinician that was not paid for when it came to signing. So we need to fund those things to ensure that the disability community is made whole.
Thank you, Lisa. Beau?
Yeah, this is an issue near and dear to my heart, and I've been fighting this in the Cortland legislature since I've come on board. One of the things we've done is, as chair of Buildings and Grounds, I've made it my mission to make sure, woefully out of the years, but make sure that our county office building is actually accessible to all floors for anyone with a disability. We've had this building open for 50 years, and there's still areas that are not accessible, and that is a travesty that I'm working to change. Anna has mentioned some great programs, access to home program, consumer-directed personal assistance programs. The visitability tax credit is something that Barbara Lifton has supported significantly and has passed the legislature multiple times, but Governor Cuomo refuses to sign it. That needs to stop. The other thing I'll mention that we haven't touched on in this issue of disability is the fact of our rural transportation networks. We have to do better to expand the accessibility to our transportation networks for people with disabilities, particularly given that fact that we're in a rural community. One of the things that a small little thing we tried to accomplish in the county office building in Cortland is based on a recommendation from a disabled individual, we were able to provide scooter charging stations in the county office building. It was a small little issue, but something that was fundamentally important to them so that when they're receiving services in our county office building, their scooters can be charged. Nobody had thought of, none of the abled people in the building had thought of it. We listened to the feedback from the community. We're able to make some positive change. So there's lots of things that we can do to make improvements.
Great, thank you, Beau. Sujata?
Sorry. So I agree with what most of my colleagues have said. The programs do need to be funded. The consumer-directed personal assistance program, and all of the programs that we have to really allow self-directed care. So the renovation of homes and supporting that financially, and getting the visibility tax credit passed. So I also would say that we have an issue with caregivers, a shortage of caregivers. I began my career as a union organizer, organizing direct care workers working in group homes for people with disabilities. And it was really outrageous how little they're paid. They're paid minimum wage. We had to fight to get them basic respect. And many of them cared a great deal about the work that they did, but they were treated so poorly and paid so poorly that it was really hard. The turnover was a huge issue, not only on the staff, but on the consumers as well, who were really losing out. So we need to do more to strengthen unions in that sector and also raise them up. I mean, what we used to say is, you're giving IVs, you're giving like things nurses would do. So but you're being paid minimum wage. So it's time to fight.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask the second question. So this is, it is very possible that Roe versus Wade may be overturned at the national level. What will you do as a state legislator to protect women's reproductive rights? And again, we will start with Seth.
Well, so I'm extremely pleased that the Women's Reproductive Act was passed by the state legislature and signed into the governor. That codifies Roe v. Wade in state law, because believe it or not, the abortion was still contained in the criminal code. This act basically made it part of the public health law. I think that was an incredibly important step to protect our state in the event that Roe v. Wade is overturned at the federal level. And I think we need to continue to push back against our federal congressional delegation to ensure that women's reproductive rights are protected at the federal level, and that funding continues to go to Planned Parenthood, which provides reproductive services to our local citizens and provides affordable health care for people. So this is an issue I care deeply about. I've passed resolutions on the Common Council on behalf of Planned Parenthood in support of the Affordable Care Act and the Planned Parenthood funding that was part of the Affordable Care Act. It's an issue that's near and dear to my heart.
Great, Jordan.
I think we're all lucky to live in a state like New York that hasn't started, picking away pieces of Roe v. Wade, picking away pieces of access to abortion and health care for women. It's a value I think as New Yorkers we hold very strong. So yes, I agree with Seph. I've been very glad to see what New York has done over the years. However, we're still facing a serious funding crisis. Who is it that doesn't have access to health care, prenatal and other services here in New York State? It's in minority, low-income communities. There's a lot more we can do today to make sure that we don't have any healthcare deserts for women who, deserve access to these types of services. We know that it's typically minority women who, die at a much higher rate from childbirth than, others in our society, and that's completely unacceptable. We should not be, creating two separate systems where based on your income, based on your race, you're unable to receive adequate care. There's nothing more important than making sure that anyone, a child in our society starts off with the best possible resources. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And go to Jason.
So yeah, we are lucky we live in New York State where women's right to choose is protected. But one of the things we have to do is make sure that our healthcare professionals also respect that, because In many places around the country, doctors or even nurses or pharmacists, for instance, can object to treating somebody or providing medication based on their religious beliefs. And I think if someone tries to do that in New York, maybe they should get a different profession. The Women's Health Act, like Seph mentioned, protects these rights, but we need to enact this New York Health Act so that people are actually covered for all these services. We need to make sure that if the federal government doesn't fund Planned Parenthood or any of their services at other types of clinics, the state provides that funding. We have a Planned Parenthood clinic here in Ithaca, and it does more than just reproductive health. And in the end, you're going to have to join the fight to publicly protect a woman's right to choose, and that means also getting involved in judicial races, because that's a place where you can get stealth candidates who can be appointed at the federal level to peel those rights back.
Thank you, Jason. Anna?
Yeah, I will agree with my colleagues that, of course, the Women's Reproductive Act passing was a blessing for everyone here in the state. I'm really glad that that happened, but there are a lot of things that we could still do. Obviously, funding to Planned Parenthood, public funding for family planning services, making sure if we do not pass the New York Health Act right away, which I am absolutely in support for and will champion, that Medicaid absolutely covers family planning and abortion rights and support for maternal care, making sure that insurance companies absolutely also have to have those in their plans while we are fighting for the New York Health Act. But I think also what's really important is to increase access to emergency contraception, and finally, that we absolutely prioritize programs in K through 12 for education. Sex education in schools is absolutely critical, reproductive rights and sex education.
Excellent, thank you, Anna. Lisa.
So having 7 sisters and a daughter, this is something that I really care about. I'm a published author with the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. So it's something that not only do I feel passionate about, I think I have a lot of knowledge about. When my daughter came home from college and said, "Mom, do I need to move to Canada because I may not be able to get my birth control pills?" It made it very real to me. I think we really need to be thankful. We do live in New York, there's no question, but an expanding abstinence plus programming in schools is absolutely vitally important. But New York State wasted $8 billion in a disrupt program, funding that went to big hospital systems instead of to small local providers like Planned Parenthood, like the local Jacobus Center for Reproductive Health. We have to make sure we're funding those organizations adequately so that they can continue to provide contraception, education, and abortion rights. And, we can't keep funding these large hospitals when they're not really providing the services that they should be providing and when the oversight is absolutely not even there. I certainly believe we should be restricting birthing centers because they're giving information that's not accurate and not effective to those who may be wanting to access abortion and cannot. So I think we really need to be looking at legislation around those centers as well.
Thank you, Lisa. And Beau.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely support a woman's right to choose and everyone's reproductive rights. And as everyone has kind of covered, it's great that we live in New York where those are sanctified in our state law. Just to reiterate a couple of key points, I do agree we absolutely must cover age-appropriate sexual education, K through 12. Children need to understand natural bodily function. We need to protect our local clinics. I do this regularly here in Cortland County, protecting, as Lisa mentioned, the Jacobus Center to make sure that it doesn't get closed, because it is the only place for people to get scientific information about abortions. They don't perform abortions, but they provide the information, as opposed to a local crisis pregnancy center, which doesn't provide that information. So we need to continue as local officials to push back. Even though it is legal, the information may not be readily available. We need to make sure that our undocumented workers have access to these reproductive rights just like everybody else. And as Anna and everybody else has said, we absolutely must pass the New York Health Act to protect them, but we cannot let employers sneak out the backside of these protections and not offer the rights that we hold dear in state law. So we just have to be vigilant at all levels.
Great, thank you, Beau. And Sujata.
So I agree with what everybody said. I am grateful we have the protections here in this state. But as we know, these protections are at risk and nationwide and even in this state. And I think if we really want to talk about, yes, we have to fund Planned Parenthood. We have to make sure our laws protect the principles of Roe v. Wade. But the reason, what I've been trying to, get across is I am pro-choice. Being pro-choice is a fundamental human right to decide what happens to our own bodies. And when we erode that in other contexts, that is why Roe v. Wade is now vulnerable today, because we haven't been willing to step out there and say that this is the line. And they keep bringing up this 1905 case, Jacobson, saying that if we can force sterilize and if we can force vaccinate, then then it can't be based on bodily autonomy. It has to be based on privacy. So if we really want to get serious about this protection, we have to really take human rights seriously and fundamental constitutional rights seriously and think about it from that context. We're not just endangering the thing we don't care about. We're endangering constitutional rights.
Great, thank you, Sujata. Okay, so I would like to do something a little bit different now. There were a few other questions in the Q&A box that I think were great questions, but I want to change up the format and try to incorporate those questions in this lightning round. And so what I would ask for you to do is to keep, the first thing that comes to your mind is what you would answer, and to keep them short, except for the very last question, which I will give you 1 minute for. And there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, there's going to be 5. So 4 lightning round quick answer questions. And then the last question will be a minute to answer that one, if that's okay. Okay, so we're going to start again with Seph. And the question is, and please don't spend like a long time answering. What is the first piece of legislation you will author?
That's an excellent question. I would say Resilient Infrastructure Fund.
Great. Jordan.
I will work to author legislation to increase research for storage capacity for renewable technology.
Jason? Oh, sorry. Got them.
Funding rural broadband statewide.
Yeah. Kind of fitting, yes. Okay, Anna.
I will focus on racial justice and reforming our policing and funding for policing to redistribute it to communities.
Great, Lisa.
Programs.
Yep, Lisa.
Flexibility in mental health and addictions counseling for telehealth so that people can have access, especially in rural areas.
Okay, Beau.
Creation of a public utility to provide universal broadband to everyone across New York State.
Great. Sujata.
Roosevelt-style Green New Deal guaranteed green jobs program through the lens of racial and social justice.
Wonderful. Thank you for keeping that short. We have 3 more short answers, if that's all right. So the first is, what bill would you want to repeal? Seth.
I actually think we should. Oh, sorry. I actually think.
Small, I should say. Sorry, go ahead. Seth, go ahead.
Walk back the recent changes to the bail reform. I think we should end cash bail entirely in the state of New York. So I would repeal that.
Jordan.
I think we should walk back the idea that the state is only going to take over the growth in Medicaid. I think the state needs to take over the entirety of Medicaid.
Jason.
Yeah, the 2020 changes to the bail reform, that the 2019 bill should be left alone.
Okay. Great. Anna.
I agree. Actually, the rollback of the bail reform.
Okay. Lisa.
Yeah, I'm going there too.
Okay. Beau.
Ma'am. It's the most important. I mean, we've seen this with the Black Lives Matter movement. We can't go back when we step back.
Yep.
And Sujata.
We'd have to restructure the Empire State Development Corporation, start giving money to the people, and defund the police.
Thank you. All right. Question number 3, and this is, I'm trying to incorporate some of the audience questions here in the lightning round. So we all know that funding is limited. In an ideal world, we'd want to fund everything that's out there. So what issue, if you had to prioritize one thing, what should get funding first? We'll start with Seth.
That's a very important question. I think funding for education in community colleges, and I also think funding for our climate goals.
Great. Jordan?
I agree with funding for pre-K through 12 to make sure that, you know, every student has a chance to live the life that they dream of.
Thank you. Jason?
The New York Health Act, I mean, we need to make that happen because it'll affect every part of the economy.
Thank you. Anna?
That's a hard one, but we're coming out of a COVID situation and crisis. I think that we should invest in a green infrastructure and a green workforce to help us rebuild our economy.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
New York Health Act, including robust supports for mental health and addictions services.
Thank you. Beau?
Yeah, I would agree with the others. The New York Health Act, if you're not healthy and alive, the rest of it really doesn't matter.
Okay. Thank you. And Sujata?
The Green New Deal, the Roosevelt-style direct jobs program, and small business and small farmer development.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll do one more question, lightning round, and then the question after that, I'll give you a minute. So this question is, what 3 committees would you want to be on right away? So we'll start with Seth.
I'd say higher education, just because we have a lot of institutions of higher education. And the ENCON committee, environmental conservation. As I said, you know, climate change and our climate goals is a major priority for me. And then I'd say, you know, it's hard. I mean, there's probably several that I could say, but if I had to really choose, I'd say the education committee.
Great, thank you. Jordan?
You know, I assume like much of us, yes, higher education and environment is critical to our community, but I would also select election law because, you know, we're going to need to fend off, you know, Russian interference and focus on cybersecurity to make sure we have fair elections going forward.
Thank you. Jason?
Judiciary, environment, and technology.
Thank you. Anna?
Well, you get 6, so you're making us choose 2. This isn't.
Three.
I would say ENCON, environmental conservation, agriculture, and housing. And if I didn't get those, economic development.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
Health, behavioral health, and aging.
Thank you. And Beau?
The 3 that are right up my alley would be economic development, energy, and local government.
Okay, thank you. And Sujata?
Economic development, healthcare, and judiciary.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this last question is also about process. So we've heard a lot over the last few weeks about policy positions and your platform positions and policy issues, but a little less about procedure. And so what I would like to ask is, how would you get this bill that you mentioned, the first bill that you mentioned in the lightning round, what would be your strategy to actually get that passed, given that you are only one assembly person in a vast number, with a vast number of other assembly people, and also given the fact that we live in a state where there is a very high level of executive power by the governor. So what strategy would you use to get this bill that you mentioned passed in your first session? And so we'll start with Seth. You get a minute.
Okay. So the bill that I mentioned is the Resilient Infrastructure Fund, which basically would allow local governments to incorporate, you know, climate resiliency into their comprehensive plans. You know, I think I would first search out, you know, Democrats that were in similar districts to this one. I would work with, as well as like state senators or in similar districts to this one. And I think we would try to build a coalition. And I think there's a lot of promising action right now on the environment. I think, holding public events, holding press conferences, writing op-eds in the media. Just recently the Restore Mother Bond Act was passed. I know that there's organizations that are also pushing for this bill. It wasn't included in the last session, but I think it's really important. And I would work with my partners in the Assembly and the State Senate to do whatever we could to pressure the governor to enact it.
Great, thanks. Jordan?
Sure. I fundamentally think that good policy is good politics. And this is what I've spent the last 10 years of my career doing for this district already with Barbara Lifton. We're speaking about my bill was to get research money towards renewable energy storage technology. Well, in fact, that's actually something I've already been working on. And within the $3 billion Restore Mother Nature Bond Act, I was able to work to get $700 million for climate resiliency in this year's state budget. So, I know how to work within the committee system and with other chairs of important committees. Here it would be Ways and Means and Energy. And as well, reach out to our local businesses, including Intertech in Cortland, which I know has already been working on, and I've met with several times. They say, we have this technology now, we just need to roll it out. We need to make sure it becomes a part of our plan going forward in the climate crisis. And, we can build coalition of business groups around the state, hold press conferences, and, the ability to get things done in Albany really comes from the people. I don't know if everyone feels that way, but it's not like everyone sits around in a room deciding amongst themselves as legislators what's going to happen. I would work with you as well.
Thank you, Jordan. Jason.
Well, first off, I'd start off with the Internet and New Technology Subcommittee. It's going to then have to go through economic development as well, because you got to identify the funding streams. But what I would actually do on the ground is get fellow town supervisors to describe and testify at hearings about the issues they've been having with companies like Spectrum, and how they're not building out, how they're not providing valid information when it comes to even telling people what they actually cover. We'd be able to talk about how ineffective the Public Service Commission in the state has been to actually help roll out internet access. And that would give all the reasons, I believe, why we would need this fund that I want to create. So I don't think you'll have a problem getting the public behind it, because I don't know a single person who's happy with Spectrum. It's sort of like finding somebody who's happy with your health insurance company. They just don't exist. But it's a matter of really convincing the legislators who are wary of the financial risk. But I think that just based on the study we did in my town, the proof is out there that it works. So it's a matter of just telling that story statewide, and I know it'll work.
Great, thank you, Jason. And Anna.
So I think having good policy is really important, but the ability to articulate and speak clearly and build coalitions is absolutely critical. As someone who's been a teacher for decades, lecturer at Cornell, a scientist, I know how to grasp the facts, I know how to articulate them, and I know how to build coalitions. I am the co-chair of a state progressive elected officials, of network of progressive elected officials. I've been on 3 standing committees of the New York State Association of Counties, working at the state level, passing legislation, pushing legislation. So that's really important in the context of what I would want to focus on, which is investing in green infrastructure. There are bills that exist, the weatherization bill that exists, also emphasis on upgrading, electrifying our transportation system and our grid as well. The state has already identified that we want to invest in infrastructure as a way to bring us back from economic recovery. It is just directing that into green infrastructure specifically, and very targeted towards municipalities that have been routinely disadvantaged, which has been identified in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
So I was talking about flexibility in behavioral health services, and it's really important to remember politics is the art of the possible, and talking to those individuals who may have a increased flexibility, for example. So OMH and OASIS are concerned if they increase flexibility, that means there will be higher utilization. Well, let's get statistics together from those providers on the ground to show why, well, if for the past 5 years your goal has been to decrease hospitalizations, higher utilization is actually indicative of actually decreasing hospitalizations, creating net savings. So it's getting the information, getting the statistical information from the providers, meeting with the members of the departments to find out what their objections are, telling them real stories of real people, because they're very good at keeping themselves separated from the real stories and focused on the numbers, and then creating a coalition of like-minded assembly people and senators as well to make sure that they understand why this is a benefit, find out what their objections are ahead of time, create the coalition that allows us to make sure we have those objections already answered before we even begin to have the conversation, based in science, statistic, and information that's factual. So just as Andrew Cuomo says, it's about the facts.
Thank you, Lisa. And Beau.
First bill, of course, that I'd want to see passed is the New York Health Act. But the first bill I would want to help write and shepherd through is building a public utility for true broadband. And I do this in a couple of different ways already. And working as an Appalachian Leadership Institute Fellow, this is a critical issue we've seen across the Appalachian region. And we've looked at this problem from many different angles. And it really starts with, as Lisa was saying, with facts. The state of New York is lying to the public about the expanse of actual broadband connectivity. We define broadband at a step just barely above dial-up, for those of us that actually remember the days of AOL. And so we don't actually establish correct guidelines as to what broadband would mean, how it's going to be scalable, how it's going to be upgradable to meet our needs not only now but into the future. And then we need to build a coalition looking back to say, using examples from our past, successful examples of our past, of the Rural Electrification Act and others, we can do this for New York. It can be a model for the country and be able to start bringing people together about this critical need, because all of us have been parents that have been pulling our hair out trying to teach our children online. We all know the issues of broadband, and we can all come together and work to make this a public utility for all.
Thank you. And Sujata.
So this is why I decided to run, because if you want the status quo, you just focus on power brokerage and building coalitions. And I've certainly done all of that through my committees and work on the bar and writing legislation and working as a government contracts attorney and with movements getting legislation through. But we need radical change right now. We need, if we're going to pass a new deal, we need to do what they did when they passed the last new deal, is get the people out in the street to the point where it's almost a revolution. It wasn't passed because FDR just had a vision and was a really nice guy and like everyone listened to him because they had coalitions. It was passed because everybody was out in the street, and the wealthy elite that control our system realized if they don't give in, there was going to be an all-out revolution. And that is the moment we're in, not to be too dramatic, but we are in a crisis. People come December are going to be out of money. Come June, they're going to be out of money. We're in a crisis, and this is the moment to seize, to get people out in the streets and do that. And I have that experience to do it with dignity, to do it peacefully, and to make change happen from that. I've done it before and I can do it here.
Excellent. Thank you all for going through that process, lightning round, and then talking about process. So we've come to the end, and that means that you will each get a closing statement. This might be the last closing statement that you have. Hopefully, I don't know, it's been a long road, so or maybe other town halls will come up. But so you will each get a minute. We'll go in the same order as before, and we will start with Seth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. And thank you to everyone for organizing this. And it is the last forum, I believe. So, I'll say that we've had a great discussion tonight in the other forums that we participated in. Clearly, these are really challenging times we're facing with the coronavirus pandemic and all the economic fallout that's associated with it. I think it's time that we end a pragmatic consensus builder to Albany. I have a track record of working effectively with people at the local level, at the state level. I've been endorsed by 20 of my current and former Common Council colleagues, the mayor of Ithaca, elected officials, all throughout the Assembly District, These are local leaders who know my track record, who have worked very closely with me, and know that I have the skills of consensus building to be able to work effectively with people. It's fine to have good policies, but those good policies don't mean anything if you don't have the ability to work with people with the policies. I have a track record of doing that. And that's why I'm asking for your vote in the New York State Assembly primary to pass the New York State Health Act, to bring healthcare to all of our citizens, to enact our climate goals, and to fund our education.
Thank you. Jordan.
So thanks again for hosting this forum and giving us, one last chance to make our case. But it's very clear, as Seph said, we're in a crisis moment economically with the pandemic, and whoever enters the seat is going to be a new freshman legislator. I believe of all the candidates that I will be able to have outsized influence and will understand immediately how to make sure our community isn't set back or lost during this difficult time. I was pleased today to receive the endorsement of Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton. She has great faith in me, having worked alongside me for 10 years, that I'm the best prepared to make sure that our community and our district is moving forward towards our progressive goals. I will fight every single day to make sure that happens. I will fight against the climate crisis. I will fight against racial injustice. I will fight to keep our schools fully funded and make sure we in this district do not have undue impact from this crisis, that we can make it through together. So I ask for your vote either right now via absentee ballot or on Saturday if you want to vote early. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jordan. Jason.
Hi, and thank you, for hosting this forum for us. I'm asking for your vote in this election simply because I have 12 years of experience building coalitions on big issues in one of the biggest towns in New York State. I've got a broad base of experience, not only in technology and telecommunications policy, energy, but also criminal justice and in the judiciary. This is a time where we have a chance to make some real changes in the state that could have been, should have been done years ago. They go from healthcare to tax policy to education and to climate change, and of course my pet project of broadband. These things will bring, and what we've been talking about, will bring equality to not just the working class of the state, but they'll also actually lift all the boats up, because the bottom line is if we don't take care of ourselves through the New York Health Act or give everybody a broad-based opportunity of education and work through broadband, New York will stagnate when we come out of this crisis, and it's about time we actually take on these two big industries and deliver for the people of New York, and I'm the guy to do it.
Thanks, Jason. Anna.
Hi, I want to thank the Cornell Institute of Politics and Global Affairs and Dr. Karim. Thank you so much, and all of the participants. This district is so much bigger than the city of Ithaca, and to succeed in Albany, one must have support that goes deeper than the establishment. I've been endorsed by a highly diverse group from multiple large labor unions representing both Cortland and Tompkins counties, to a wide range of prominent leaders in the local community, including county legislators, authors, physicians, climate activists, and a diverse set of female leaders. I have support around the state, including Zephyr Teachout, Cynthia Nixon, the Working Families Party, and Eleanor's Legacy, where I've built a strong coalition of strong women allies. This is the type of coalition building that is necessary to get important progressive legislation passed at the Capitol. No one can be at the head of the table, but I believe that everyone needs to be at the table for real solutions. I am a progressive legislator and have passed every piece of legislation I brought to a bipartisan legislature. I have effectively governed for a county that is both highly urban and rural. I have years of both local and state experience. I'm a lifelong activist, a public servant, and I would be the only public health scientist in the entire state legislature. I truly believe that I'm the right person for these times to represent us in Albany. I'm committed to fight for policy for the people as our next state assembly person. Please join me, and you can find more information at kellesforny.com. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Lisa.
So this is traditionally a women's seat, and I really want to support women in the legislature and women making laws, because I think that women bring a unique perspective to the table. So I really do want to support all the women that are on this forum and thank them for their work. You know, we don't need more of the same. Some may say it's a risk to go with an untested individual. I say it's a risk to stick with what we've always had. The most important watchword moving forward is flexibility. We need to look at what's happening today and make sure we're addressing the problems of today. COVID may not go away. COVID, we may be able to figure out how to deal with, but there's going to be a crisis down the road, and we need someone who is bold, who is passionate, who can create collaboration based on the emergence problems as we move forward, and someone who cares about families and really sees them each and every day, both urban and rural, understands their problems, cares about them. That's why I'm in this race, because I care about our people. And I want to make sure that whatever we provide them in terms of services is rooted in the pragmatic needs that these people have. This isn't about me, and it certainly isn't about the governor. It's about the people that we serve. And I feel like I'm the most passionate individual that brings the most flexibility to the table that can help this district move forward. I ask for your support on June 23rd. Before that, during the period when you can provide absentee ballots, and please do go to my website and find out more about me.
Sorry, you were muted. So thanks everybody for pulling this forum together. It was a great final opportunity to put a keystone on all these forums we participated in. Just wanted to end with a couple of final thoughts for people as we wrap up. You know, it's real easy to build coalitions and to move things forward in our local governments when we're in the majority, when everybody around us all agrees on the same things. And we've seen a lot of that here in, you know, on these forums. We agree on a lot of things, but it's a different thing altogether. And it's a much harder position of leadership. And it takes much deeper thought and a much more active imagination and a much better sense of people in order to lead from a position of a minority leader. And I've been able to pull together groups in Cortland County from a minority position to make sure that we still get things done for the people and for our county and for our state. You know, I've looked at ways that this works across our region in the Appalachian Leadership Institute and others to find ways that we can pull together, to bring together like-minded individuals who may not be in their majority in their communities, but can help affect change. We need somebody with that seasoned leadership, not somebody who has simply just been an Albany insider for years, or who has had positions in state government or local government is their level of experience. We need somebody with a business background, with an IT background, with a leadership background who can move our county and our district forward in order to make sure that we have the strongest advocate for New York State when it comes to Albany. And I believe I am that individual for this district, and I ask for your vote in this primary. Thank you.
Thank you, Beau. And Sujata.
It's easy to pass every piece of legislation if it's all 9 non-binding resolutions and expanding the airport for private jet travel. And it's easy to get along with your, build your coalitions if you're just, I can do that, but with me that you're not going to get somebody who's saying one thing now and going in and then voting to get along. Anna Kelles ran on Mike, make change. I've been out on the streets making change from the inside and the outside. I helped stop, the plan to make the capital fracked gas storage capital of the Northeast with my tireless work on We Are Seneca Lake. I represented over 650 defendants for years and didn't sleep for many years or didn't really eat very well for many years. I have the passion, I have the drive. I'm a successful attorney. I've been an attorney for 13 years. I teach law, but more importantly, I am not going to let you down. You have a chance right now to elect the first woman of color to ever represent this district in Albany. And I am also somebody that you can trust that is going to have your back every moment that I'm in office. I'm going to be fighting for the people, not the privileged. I'm going to be fighting to make sure that you have healthcare and jobs and housing, and that we stop racism. So if you want things to change, I need your vote.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to an end. Thank you all for joining us. We had, I think we had over 100 people registered for this event. And I think, you know, it's been a long night and we've had quite a high participation rate. But I also would like to thank each and every one of the candidates. I know this hasn't been easy. It's a long road. I hope you will all get to take a nap after this, or at least to get to sleep tonight. But I do actually want to hand it over to Doug, if that's okay, to give just an announcement. We do have a very exciting event that's coming up on Monday. Doug, if you want to just give the plug for that real quick. And then, yeah.
All right. I think that Congressman Israel might have mentioned at the very beginning, for anyone that might have missed it, on Monday, we have, I think, up to 4 members now of the Congressional Black Caucus who will be joining us to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, legislative solutions moving through Capitol Hill, and to have a really engaging discussion with us. We'll be sending around emails, so anyone that signed up for our email list, you'll get an email for it, but anyone else is welcome to just go onto the Cornell events calendar. I think it's just events.cornell.edu. If you search for the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs, you'll find the event there. You simply register for it, it's free, and we would really love to see all of you there. So thanks very much.
Thanks. And I will just mention very quickly that this was our first local event, but we hope to have another debate when the actual primary season is over for the state Senate candidates. And so we'll send more information out about that when the time comes. So thank you again. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you for all of the questions. They were all excellent. And thank you for, again, all of you for all the hard work that you have been doing for all of us. So have a good night.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.